Hi and welcome to Two Wheel Reviews. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Royal Enfield Bullet 350 Classic. Now here's a bike, if any ever did, that deserves the moniker Classic because not only is it retro styled, it's actually manufactured using the same tooling and methods in India until very recently, exactly as they were in Redditch in the 1950s. Now anybody that knows a little about these machines will be quite aware that they are now made in Chennai, India, at the Royal Enfield factory there. And I'm just going to give you a potted history of the Royal Enfield company without going into too much detail because you don't need to know all the specifics. But in 1893 the Enfield Manufacturing Company was set up and created. A short while after that the Royal was added to the name and it became the Royal Enfield Company. Initially they produced bicycles, a little later engines, and eventually the two married up, and gradually motorbikes were created under the Royal Enfield banner and used during the war years. And accordingly this means that Royal Enfield as a motorcycle manufacturer is actually the oldest surviving motorcycle manufacturer in the world today. Now the Enfield Bullet, as we would recognise it today, first appeared in the post-war years, in the late 40s in Redditch, England. In 1955 the Indian government was looking for a motorbike for its armed forces to use for patrols and such like, and the Enfield Bullet was chosen. They ordered at that time 800 motorbikes, which was a massive order back then, and to make things easier the Royal Enfield Company of Redditch, England partnered with Madras Motors in Madras, which is of course now Chennai in India, and they shipped out the parts, and the Madras Motors built them up into the Royal Enfield motorcycles under licence. In 1957 tooling was sold to the Madras Motors Company so that they could produce their own parts and spares and so on, and manufacture continued from there. In 1967 production of the Bullet in the UK was stopped, and in 1970 the Royal Enfield Company ceased trading in the UK. Shortly thereafter the Indian government bought the rights to use the name and continued to produce the Bullet in Chennai in India right up until 2007 in its classic iron barrel form, until ever stricter EU emissions laws prevented them from being able to continue. But instead of stopping production altogether, they went on to develop a modern incarnation of the classic design, but using an all-alloy unit construction electronic fuel injection engine. Okay, so having gone through that, let's take a look around the bike. The Royal Enfield Bullet 350 Classic uses a steel tubular frame connected to which is an alloy constructed single cylinder 350cc petrol engine with a cast iron barrel and an alloy cylinder head. It's fed by a McCarb VM24 carburetor, which is a built under license copy of the Mikuni carburetor you see on many Japanese motorbikes. The spark is managed by an old-fashioned contact breaker system, and the drive to the rear wheel is by chain. The Bullet uses 19-inch spoked rims. The rear suspension is by twin coil spring. The front suspension by telescopic forks. And braking at both front and rear is by drum brake. On the rear it uses a rod operated single leading shoe design, and on the front a cable operated twin leading shoe design. The generator case shown here houses the generator at the front, the clutch assembly at the rear, and is driven by a chain in an oil bath. The electrics on the bike is catered for by a 12 volt negative earth system. Air is fed into the carburetor using a classically styled T-Caddy air filter. On the right hand side of the engine you can see the oil filter at the bottom, the oil pump assembly and the timing case with the oil filler behind, which leads to the tank, which although is cast into the engine is a separate component. The small black square above the timing case is where tappet adjustment is carried out by means of a threaded rod, and then the pipework leading up there is the oil feed to the cylinder head and the rocker assembly. On the right hand side also you'll see the gearbox assembly, which is bolted to the rear of the engine. It's a right foot shift like the classic British design, with a 4-speed gearbox, first gear up, second, third and fourth down. It is a kickstart only and has a completely unique feature to Royal Enfields, a neutral finder. Now when in second, third or fourth gear, while the bike is rolling, you can pull in the clutch, press down on this with your heel, and this will slot the gearbox into neutral between first and second, saving you the hassle of juggling for neutral while sat at traffic lights. On either side of the bike you have pressed steel toolboxes, which come in very handy for stowing tools and bits and pieces. Seating in this case is provided by a single sprung saddle, although the standard seating is a twin seat, pretty much as you would see on most modern motorbikes. The Bullet's provided with quite a large fuel tank, which will typically give somewhere between 150 and 200 mile range when running correctly. The instruments are pretty much the same as any Japanese machine that you would find, with an engine kill switch on the right bar along with the throttle and brake, and switches for your horn, indicators and headlight on the left hand one along with your clutch lever. The instrument nacelle houses the ignition key, the speedometer and the ammeter. Starting a kickstart only Royal Enfield Bullet is a little bit of an art, so one that I will show you separately in this next clip. Okay, so we're in the right position to start the bike, so you've got your kickstart flipped out, you're ready to go. You're just over top dead centre, using the decompressor, so ignition on, fuel on. If it's cold, pull your choke to full out. If it's quite warm, you probably won't need it, but if it won't start on the choke first couple of kicks, then push your choke in and try without, and you may need a little whiff of throttle. Otherwise, with the choke you shouldn't need any at all, but one long smooth kick. You don't need to kick it hard, you just need to follow right the way through to make sure you get a good full revolution, and it should fire up. Of equal importance, when you switch the bike off, is a procedure for stopping it and making it ready for parking. So first of all, ignition off, and the engine will stop, as you see there. Now, to prevent the potential problem of wet sumping, you need to make sure that you leave it parked with your piston at top dead centre, and this also has the benefit of leaving it ready to kickstart without having to go through the cycle and over top dead centre the next time around. So you kickstart out, push it down until you feel compression. Like this one, when it's tuned well, it should stop pretty much at the compression stroke anyway, so you shouldn't be you should be on the compression stroke on the way up. Press in your decompressor and just push it over top dead centre as you did when you're getting it ready for starting. The next time around you wanting to start, you'll just need to switch the ignition on, switch your fuel on, choke on and kick it over, or choke off if it's warm. Now, because this isn't an on-road review, of course I can't show you footage of me riding it on the road with feedback. What I can do is give you feedback on what it is like to ride one of these bikes. Now, the one thing I will say right out from the start, the Enfield is a speed machine. If you want something with a good turn of speed, you want to be able to overtake cars or accelerate very, very rapidly, this is most definitely not the machine for you. The closest comparison that I could come up with is it's very similar in performance, but maybe a little more torquey than a modern 4-stroke 125 would be from one of the big four manufacturers. So there's plenty of power there. A well set up stock bullet will see 65 miles per hour, but it won't thank you for doing that over extended periods of time. The 500cc bullet, you would probably get 70-75 miles per hour out of, maybe a little more, but again it won't thank you for doing it over extended periods of time. But you don't buy one of these machines if you want to go fast. You can, of course, should you wish to do so, tinker with these, tune them, modify them, and even race them. If the fancy takes you. Some people out there like to mess about with these things, and good for them, that's great. There's a company in the UK called Hitchcock's who can supply pretty much everything and anything that you will ever need to work on, rebuild and repair an Enfield bullet, including body kits for racers, cafe racers, and even a rigid hardtail conversion, so that you can make yours like one of the post-war rear suspensionless bullets. In addition to that, eBay is a great source of cheap parts from India, provided that you're willing to wait a week or two to receive them. The parts are very readily available, very cheap, and overall the bike is an absolute pleasure to ride. Now, what about the downsides? Because of course there's always a downside to every vehicle. Now for me there are only really two. One of which is the gearbox, and shifting, especially downshifting when the engine is hot, can be tricky, and this is due to flex in the outer gearbox case. Fortunately fixes are available, there are homegrown ones, and you can also buy parts again from Hitchcock's to fix the gearbox flexing problem. The other one for me is the front brake. Although it's a twin leading shoe and obviously is designed as such to increase the braking performance, they're still very poor, even by modern drum brake standards. But provided you know what to expect when you pull the brake lever and you ride accordingly, they're perfectly adequate for use on today's roads. You would, for example, if you jumped from a sports bike with modern disc brakes that stop the moment you think of touching the brake lever, then you'd be in for a big shock if you jumped straight onto this and expected it to do the same. But provided you've got the right mindset and you know what to expect, then they are quite adequate. They're certainly not the best, and I'd be wary of even calling them good, but they do the job. So what else is there to say about the Enfield Bullet? Well, really nothing. Pretty much as you've seen with the overview, what you see is what you get with this bike. It's as simple as a motorbike can be. It has an engine, a frame, a seat, two wheels and brakes and a throttle. It has the necessary bits to make it start and go, it has the necessary bits to make it stop, and overall it takes you back to a time when riding was all about pleasure and not showing off with the latest and greatest, all singing, all dancing, computerised this, that and the other. You just get on, start it, load up your luggage if necessary, and off you go. Sit back, relax and enjoy the ride. Now, one very obvious thing to add is if you've ever fancied a classic Brit bike, then the Enfield Bullet is a perfect choice to start with, because everything about it is classic Brit bike. Just like an old Velocette or a VSA or anything like that, you've got the natural charm in the handling characteristics, the way it looks, the way it's built and the way it rides, but with the incredibly useful addition of a modern bike spares backup, and not only that, a massive online community of enthusiasts who are happy to help you in this review. Do bear in mind, if you've ever fancied one of these, that production of the Iron Barrel stopped in 2007. So while the numbers out there are still quite high, there are still quite a few about, and while they are still relatively cheap and readily available, that won't be the case forever, and as with all bikes, the numbers will dwindle and the prices will increase. So now would probably be a good time to start looking for one. I think it's going to be a good few years yet before the prices of these get to sort of BSE or Velocet proportions, but certainly bear that in mind. I'm just going to end this now on a request. If anybody out there owns one of the newer model Bullet Classics with the unit construction engines and would like a review and would be prepared to donate it for said review, then please do get in touch with me, as I'd be very interested to ride one of the newer ones and compare the two, and I'd love to do a review on one. I hope you found this review interesting. Thank you for watching. Please check out my other videos, and we'll see you in the next one.